You know, I've been covering celebrity legal drama for years now, but what happened in an Atlanta federal courthouse on September 9th, 2025 was different. Picture this. You're sitting in one of America's most prestigious appeals courts. The room is packed with legal observers, journalists, and court watchers. And then you watch as one of the most expensive legal teams money can buy gets absolutely grilled by a panel of federal judges.
Do you think meeting Harry, being with Harry, marrying Harry has improved your sister's behavior, or do you think it's made it worse, the whole situation?
I'm talking about Meghan Markle's attorneys. And their client? Well, she wasn't even in the room to see it happen. Look, before we dive deep into this story, I need to tell you up front, this is my analysis of publicly available court information, media reports, and legal filings. I'm not a lawyer, this isn't legal advice, and honestly, court proceedings can be interpreted in different ways by different people. But what I'm about to share with you comes from court transcripts, observer accounts, and interviews with legal experts who are actually there. So grab a coffee, settle in, because we're about to unpack one of the most fascinating family legal battles of our time. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll understand why some experts are calling this a potential turning point, not just for the Markle family, but for how we think about celebrity, truth, and accountability in the social media age.
I don't think she's capable of empathy, remorse, or shame. I don't think she could feel enough to apologize.
All right, let's rewind and get everyone up to speed, because this story, it's been building for years. Back in March 2021, millions of people around the world watched Meghan Markle sit down with Oprah Winfrey. It was television gold, raw, emotional, and absolutely captivating. But buried in that 2-hour special was a single sentence that would eventually land both sisters in federal court. "I grew up as an only child." Now, when Meghan said that, most viewers probably thought nothing of it. It felt like context, you know, setting up her story about feeling isolated, different, maybe explaining why royal life was so challenging for her.
Pillow under your skirt, and there's live footage of her walking towards camera with her abdomen.
But Samantha Markle, Meghan's half-sister, she heard something completely different. She heard erasure. And here's where it gets complicated, because family dynamics always are. Samantha and Meghan share a father, Thomas Markle. They're about 17 years apart in age, and their relationship has been, well, let's call it complicated for decades. According to court filings, Samantha argues that she and Meghan did share parts of their childhood. There were family gatherings, holidays, even periods where they lived in the same household. Samantha points to school records, family photos, even social media posts from years past as evidence that Meghan's only child claim wasn't just misleading, it was demonstrably false. But here's what makes this more than just family drama. Meghan didn't just say this once and move on. In December 2022, when she and Harry released their Netflix documentary series, she doubled down. The series painted a picture of isolation, of being disconnected from siblings, of essentially growing up alone. For Samantha, watching millions of people consume this narrative while she dealt with what she describes as online harassment, threats, and public humiliation, it was the last straw. So in March 2022, she filed a defamation lawsuit in federal court. The claim? That Meghan had deliberately and falsely portrayed their family dynamic to boost her own public image while damaging Samantha's reputation. Now, I'll be honest with you. When this lawsuit first hit the news, most legal experts gave it very little chance of success. Defamation cases are notoriously difficult to win, especially against public figures. Celebrity lawyers are expensive for a reason, and Meghan's team had a track record of making these kinds of cases disappear quietly. The first few rounds went exactly as predicted. Multiple claims were dismissed. Judges ruled that some of Meghan's statements were clearly opinion rather than fact. Legal commentators started writing obituaries for Samantha's case. But then something interesting happened. Instead of walking away, Samantha appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. And that decision, my friends, is what led us to that packed courtroom in Atlanta on September 9th. Because appeals courts, they operate very differently from trial courts. They're focused on legal principles, precedent, and whether lower courts got the law right. They're not easily impressed by celebrity status or expensive legal teams. And as Meghan's attorneys were about to discover, They're absolutely ruthless when they think you're wasting their time. So let's walk into that courtroom together, because what happened next was unlike anything most court observers had seen in a celebrity case. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals isn't your typical legal venue. This is where some of the most important federal decisions get made. The judges are experienced, no nonsense, and they've seen every legal strategy imaginable. When you walk into their courtroom, you better come prepared. Meghan's legal team apparently got that memo because they came loaded for bear. According to legal observers, their strategy was what one attorney described to me as a kitchen sink approach. Throw every possible defense at the court and hope something sticks. They argued for First Amendment protection. They claimed the statements were clearly opinion. They suggested Samantha wasn't really a public figure. They even argued that the case should be dismissed because Meghan's comments were made in the context of entertainment, not news. But here's the thing about appeals court judges. They don't like scattershot approaches. They want precision. They want you to pick your best argument and defend it brilliantly. And almost immediately, you could feel the tension in the room shift. Chief Judge William Pryor, and this is based on court transcripts and observer accounts, apparently wasn't impressed. According to legal reporters who were present, he used the word scattershot to describe Meghan's defense strategy. In appeals court language, that's basically judicial speech for "you're wasting our time." Now, imagine you're one of Meghan's attorneys at that moment. You've probably charged hundreds of thousands of dollars for this case. Your client is one of the most famous women in the world, and a federal judge just essentially called your argument sloppy. But it gets worse, because the judges didn't just attack the style, they started poking holes in the substance. One of the most intense exchanges came when they revisited that original Oprah interview statement. Meghan's lawyers tried to argue that "I grew up as an only child" was purely subjective, a feeling, an emotional truth, not a factual claim that could be proven or disproven. But Samantha's attorneys came prepared. They had school records showing both sisters listed the same address during certain periods. They had family photos from holidays and gatherings. They had interviews and social media posts where Meghan herself had referenced her siblings. And the judges? They started asking some really pointed questions. According to court transcripts, one judge essentially asked, if Ms. Markle is free to rewrite her family narrative publicly, where does that leave Ms. Samantha Markle's right to protect her reputation? That question, that's the heart of this entire case. Because we're living in an era where personal branding is everything. Social media allows public figures to craft their own narratives, tell their own stories, control their own image in ways that weren't possible even 20 years ago. But what happens when your personal brand directly impacts someone else's reputation? What happens when your story makes someone else the villain? Or worse, erases them completely? The Netflix issue made things even more complicated, because by the time the documentary series came out, Meghan wasn't just sharing her perspective in an interview. She was literally producing content that millions of people would consume as entertainment. According to legal experts I spoke with, this is where the case gets really interesting from a legal precedent standpoint. One entertainment lawyer told me that the judges seemed particularly focused on whether Meghan's repeated framing crossed the line from personal storytelling into what he called reputation management through narrative control. And then came what multiple court observers described as the most explosive moment of the day. Samantha's attorneys presented documentation of real-world consequences. They showed evidence of online harassment campaigns targeting Samantha after Meghan's interviews aired. They presented threats, social media attacks, and what they argued was a systematic effort to paint Samantha as a liar and a fame seeker. Now, here's why this landed so hard in the courtroom. Judges deal with abstract legal principles all day long. But when you can show concrete harm, when you can demonstrate that words led directly to harassment, threats, and reputational damage, suddenly the human cost becomes impossible to ignore. And that's when Meghan's legal team made what several observers described as their biggest mistake of the day. You know what's fascinating about watching experienced attorneys work? When they're good, it looks effortless. Every question gets a crisp answer. Every challenge gets met with confidence. The whole performance feels choreographed, even when they're facing hostile judges. But when it goes wrong, when the wheels come off, it's absolutely brutal to watch. And according to everyone I spoke with who was in that courtroom, that's exactly what happened next. Facing pressure from the judges about the real-world consequences of Meghan's statements, her legal team tried to pivot. They fell back on a First Amendment defense, essentially arguing that this was a textbook case of free speech suppression. Now, that's not necessarily a bad argument in theory. The First Amendment does protect a lot of speech that people might find offensive or even harmful. But here's the thing about making First Amendment arguments in defamation cases. You better know exactly what you're talking about. Because one of the appellate judges fired back with what court observers described as a devastating question. According to transcripts, he asked something along the lines of, "Counsel, are you suggesting that free speech protects statements that can be demonstrably disproven?" And that's when things got really uncomfortable. Instead of giving a clear, confident answer about the limits of defamation law, Meghan's attorney apparently stumbled. According to legal reporters who were present, he shifted between different arguments, sometimes claiming the statements were opinion, sometimes arguing they were true, sometimes suggesting that Samantha wasn't really a public figure and therefore deserved less protection. Here's why that was such a disaster. In appeals court, consistency is everything. Judges want to see that you have a clear legal theory and you're sticking to it. When you start shifting between contradictory arguments in real time, it signals either that you don't understand your own case or that you're trying to mislead the court. Neither is a good look, but it gets worse. Because while this is all happening in the courtroom, there's a whole other drama playing out in real time on social media. See, appeals court hearings are public. Legal reporters were live tweeting the proceedings. Court observers were sharing updates in real time. And within hours, clips and quotes from the hearing were spreading across every platform you can imagine. Twitter was brutal. Legal TikTok creators were having a field day. YouTube commentary channels started dropping analysis videos before the hearing was even over. And the narrative that emerged wasn't about the complex legal issues at stake. It was much simpler and much more damaging. Meghan's expensive lawyers got schooled by federal judges. For someone whose entire post-royal brand is built on precision messaging, control, and strategic communication, this was catastrophic. Because in 2025, it doesn't matter if you eventually win a court case if you lose the publicity battle in real time. And here's the really damaging part. Meghan wasn't even there to control the narrative. She wasn't in the courtroom to show strength, confidence, or leadership. To the public watching this unfold on social media, it looked like she was hiding behind lawyers who couldn't deliver. One crisis PR expert I spoke with described it as every celebrity's nightmare scenario. A public legal humiliation playing out in real time with no ability to respond or reframe the story. But the real trial wasn't happening in that Atlanta courtroom. It was happening on every screen, every platform, and every device where people consume news and form opinions about public figures. You know, I've covered a lot of celebrity legal battles over the years, and there's usually a predictable rhythm to how the story gets told. Day 1, you get the basic facts. Day 2, you get the analysis and expert opinions. Day 3, maybe some follow-up coverage. Then everyone moves on to the next scandal. But this was different. Within 6 hours of that appeals court hearing ending, there were more than 50 articles published across major news outlets. By the next morning, legal commentary YouTube channels had racked up hundreds of thousands of views. TikTok creators were posting breakdown videos that were getting millions of plays. And here's what was really interesting. This wasn't just celebrity gossip coverage. Serious legal publications were treating this as a significant development. The American Bar Association Journal ran a piece about celebrity defamation cases. Law school professors were using it as a teaching moment about appeals court procedure. But the mainstream coverage? That was absolutely savage. Headlines like Meghan's legal nightmare, Duchess humiliated in federal court, and royal legal strategy in ruins dominated news feeds. Even outlets that have been generally sympathetic to Meghan were running critical analysis. And social media? It was a feeding frenzy. The hashtag #MeghanLegal was trending within hours. Clips from the court hearing were being shared millions of times. Royal family fan accounts were having an absolute field day. But here's what made this different from typical celebrity pile-ons. A lot of the criticism was coming from legal professionals. Real attorneys were posting analysis videos explaining why the courtroom performance was so problematic. Law professors were tweeting about the strategic mistakes they observed. When legal experts are publicly criticizing your court strategy, that's not just bad PR, it's a professional credibility crisis. And the numbers told a brutal story. Negative coverage was outperforming sympathetic coverage by almost 4-1. Engagement on critical posts was through the roof. Even Meghan's most devoted supporters were struggling to find positive angles to promote. Crisis communications experts started weighing in with what they called nightmare scenario analysis. One PR professional I interviewed described it as watching someone's reputation get dismantled in real time with no effective response strategy. Because here's the thing about crisis communications in 2025, it's not enough to eventually get your side of the story out. If you lose the first 24 hours of news coverage, you're playing catch-up forever. And Meghan's team? They went completely silent. No statements from her representatives. No strategic leaks to friendly journalists. No social media response. Nothing. Now, sometimes silence is a strategy. Sometimes the best thing you can do in a crisis is wait for it to blow over. But this wasn't that kind of situation. This was the kind of story that gets worse when there's no response. Because in the absence of official comment, everyone else gets to define the narrative. And the narrative that emerged was devastating. Meghan's legal strategy was falling apart. Her expensive attorneys were getting embarrassed by federal judges, and she was nowhere to be found when her reputation was under attack. One entertainment industry insider told me that by the end of that week, Meghan had become what Hollywood executives fear most: radioactive talent, someone whose personal drama overshadows any project they're attached to. And that leads us to perhaps the most important question in this entire saga. What does this mean for Meghan's carefully constructed post-royal empire? Let's talk about what's really at stake here, because this courtroom drama isn't happening in a vacuum. This is about money, influence, and the future of one of the most famous couples in the world. When Meghan and Harry stepped back from royal duties in 2020, they made a bet. They wagered that they could build something bigger and more lucrative than what they left behind. And for a while, it looked like they were right. Netflix deal reportedly worth over $100 million. Spotify partnership, book deals, speaking engagements, a production company. The beginnings of a media empire that could potentially rival anything they had access to as working royals. But here's the thing about Hollywood, and I've learned this covering the entertainment industry for years. Reputation is literally currency. Studios, streaming platforms, publishers, they're not just buying your talent. They're buying your ability to generate positive buzz, drive subscriptions, and create content that people want to consume without baggage. And right now, Meghan's baggage is becoming impossible to ignore. I spoke with several entertainment industry insiders about this, and the conversations were fascinating. One studio executive told me that Meghan's current situation represents what they call brand contamination, where an individual's personal drama becomes so prominent that it overshadows any project they're attached to. Think about it from a business perspective. You're a Netflix executive. You've invested millions in content featuring Meghan and Harry. But every time their names appear in headlines, it's not about their charitable work or creative projects. It's about family feuds, legal battles, and courtroom humiliations. That's not the kind of association that drives subscription growth. And the whispers are already starting. Trade publications have been running pieces about Sussex fatigue in Hollywood circles. Some industry observers are suggesting that the couple's brand has become more of a liability than asset. But here's where it gets even more complicated. Prince Harry. Throughout this entire legal saga, Harry has been remarkably quiet. No public statements supporting Meghan. No appearances at court hearings. No strategic interviews reframing the narrative. Now, there are multiple ways to interpret this. Maybe it's strategic, letting the legal process play out without political interference. Maybe it's personal, staying out of what's fundamentally a family dispute between sisters. But from a public relations perspective, his silence is deafening. Royal commentators have started speculating about cracks in the Sussex United Front. Some suggest that Harry might be reconsidering his own relationship with his family in light of Meghan's ongoing battles. Others argue that his silence represents fatigue with being constantly defined by controversy. Either way, The optics are terrible, because the entire Sussex brand was built on the idea of partnership, of being a united team taking on the world together. When that partnership looks strained in public, it undermines everything they've tried to build. And there's another factor that makes this particularly dangerous: timing. We're now 5 years out from exit. The initial sympathy and curiosity that drove massive media attention is starting to fade. The public's patience for ongoing royal drama has limits, and those limits might be getting tested. One royal expert I interviewed put it perfectly: there's only so many times you could be the victim of circumstances before people start wondering if maybe you're the common denominator in all these conflicts. So where does this all go from here? What happens to the Markle sisters, to Meghan's empire, to the carefully constructed narrative that's been years in the making? Legally speaking, the appeals court will eventually rule on whether Samantha's case can proceed. Statistically, appeals like this are long shots. Most defamation cases get dismissed, and celebrity defendants usually have the resources to outlast individual plaintiffs. But here's what makes this case different. It's not really about the legal outcome anymore. It's about perception, reputation, and the long-term consequences of very public family warfare. Even if Meghan wins this appeal, even if Samantha's case gets dismissed permanently, the damage to Meghan's brand might already be irreversible. Because in the age of social media and instant news cycles, the process has become the punishment. Every court hearing generates negative headlines. Every legal filing becomes content for commentary channels. Every development reinforces a narrative of ongoing chaos and family dysfunction. And that's a problem when your entire post-royal strategy depends on being seen as a positive, inspiring, forward-looking public figure. Family relationship experts I've spoken with add another sobering perspective. Once siblings drag each other through multiple levels of federal court, reconciliation becomes almost impossible. This isn't just a legal fight anymore. It's the public autopsy of a family relationship. For Meghan, who left the royal family partly to escape constant scrutiny and media drama, there's a bitter irony here. She escaped one palace of scrutiny only to find herself trapped in another one of her own making. But maybe that's the real story here. Maybe this isn't about Meghan versus Samantha, or even about defamation law or celebrity accountability. Maybe it's about something much more fundamental: the collision between personal truth and public image in an age where everyone's life is content and everyone's story is a brand. Because in the end, Meghan Markle might win every legal battle she faces. But if she loses the story, if she becomes defined by courtroom drama rather than charitable work, by family feuds rather than creative projects, then what has she really won? And that's a question that goes way beyond one family's legal battles. That's a question about power, truth, and accountability in the age of social media. And the answer might define a lot more than just Meghan Markle's future. What do you think? Is this the beginning of the end for Meghan's post-royal empire, or just another storm she'll weather like all the others? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the stories shaping our cultural conversation.